What if I told you that the device in your pocket right now knows more about your unconscious mind than you've discovered in your entire life? Not your thoughts, not your memories, but something far more disturbing, your shadow self, the part of you that Jung spent decades trying to help people understand, the part you've been unconsciously hiding from yourself. Your smartphone has been quietly documenting it, cataloging it, and using it against you in ways that would have horrified even Jung himself. You've felt it, haven't you? That uncanny moment when your phone suggests exactly what you were thinking about, when an ad appears for something you only mentioned in passing, when your recommended content seems to understand your mood before you've consciously recognized it yourself. Most people dismiss this as clever algorithms or coincidence. But what Jung discovered about the shadow self reveals something far more psychologically disturbing about what's actually happening. Your phone isn't just tracking your behavior, it's mapping your unconscious mind with a precision that no therapist, no analyst, not even Jung himself could ever achieve. But before we explore why your digital shadow might be more real than your conscious identity, I need to ask you something that might make you uncomfortable. When was the last time you looked at your screen time report and felt genuine shock? Not just, oh, that's a lot, but actual psychological disturbance at how much of your life has been absorbed into this device. Drop a comment and tell me your weekly screen time average. No judgment, just honesty. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because what Jung's shadow theory reveals about smartphone addiction will fundamentally change how you understand both technology and your own unconscious mind. Share this with anyone who checks their phone within 5 minutes of waking up. They need to understand what's actually happening to their psychological sovereignty. Jung's discovery of the shadow self emerged from one of the most disturbing observations in psychological history. He found that every person carries within them a hidden personality, a collection of traits, desires, impulses, and characteristics that their conscious mind finds unacceptable and therefore represses into the unconscious. This shadow self doesn't disappear just because you refuse to acknowledge it. Instead, it operates autonomously, influencing your decisions, shaping your reactions, and manifesting in ways you can't consciously control. But here's what made Jung's shadow theory revolutionary. He discovered that the shadow self reveals itself not through what people say they want or believe, but through their actual behavior when they think no one is watching. The shadow emerges in unguarded moments, in automatic responses, in the choices people make when they believe they're acting freely, but are actually being driven by unconscious impulses they don't recognize or understand. Think about your smartphone usage for a moment. Not what you tell yourself about how you use it, but your actual behavior. The apps you open compulsively, the content you consume at 3 in the morning when you can't sleep, the rabbit holes you disappear down when you're alone and bored, the searches you make that you'd never want anyone else to see. This isn't your conscious rational self making deliberate choices. This is your shadow self operating freely, expressing desires and impulses that your conscious mind would never openly acknowledge. Your smartphone has become what Jung would have called a perfect shadow mirror. Unlike human observers who might judge or intervene, unlike therapists who might interpret or analyze, your phone simply watches and records everything with complete neutrality. Every tap, every scroll, every pause, every hesitation. It documents the timing of your usage, noting when you're most vulnerable to impulsive behavior. It catalogs the content you consume, revealing desires and interests your conscious mind might deny. It tracks your patterns, exposing unconscious rhythms and compulsions you've never consciously recognized. But here's where this becomes deeply disturbing. From a Jungian perspective, traditional shadow work requires years of therapy, honest self-reflection, and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths about yourself. Most people never do this work. They spend their entire lives unconscious of their shadow, letting it control them from behind the psychological curtain, while believing they're making conscious, rational choices. Your smartphone, however, doesn't need your conscious cooperation to map your shadow. It doesn't require your honesty or self-awareness. It simply watches what you actually do, documenting your shadow self with algorithmic precision that would have been impossible in Jung's era. Every behavioral pattern, every consumption habit, every impulsive choice gets recorded, analyzed, and integrated into an increasingly accurate model of who you really are beneath your conscious self-image. Remember that uncomfortable feeling you get when your phone seems to know what you want before you consciously want it? That's not technological magic. That's your phone recognizing patterns in your shadow behavior that you haven't consciously acknowledged. It sees the version of you that emerges when your conscious defenses are down, when you're tired, stressed, lonely, or bored. The version of you that operates on unconscious impulses rather than rational decisions. Jung discovered that people typically respond to their shadow in 3 ways. First, projection, where they see their own unacknowledged traits in others and judge them harshly. Second, denial, where they construct elaborate rationalizations for behavior that's actually driven by unconscious impulses. Third, integration, where they consciously acknowledge and accept their shadow aspects, bringing them into awareness and thereby reducing their unconscious control. But your smartphone enables a 4th response that Jung never imagined: algorithmic enablement. Your phone doesn't just observe your shadow behavior, it actively feeds it, strengthens it, and makes it easier to express, while maintaining your conscious denial. The algorithm learns what your shadow wants and provides endless opportunities to satisfy those desires, while your conscious mind maintains plausible deniability about what's actually happening. Consider how this works in practice. Your shadow might contain impulses toward comparison and envy that your conscious mind finds unacceptable. Your phone learns this pattern and fills your feed with content designed to trigger those exact impulses, keeping you engaged through shadow activation. Your conscious mind might tell itself you're just staying informed or connected, but your actual behavior reveals someone compulsively checking to see if others have better lives, more success, more happiness than you do. Or perhaps your shadow contains desires for validation and significance that your conscious self-image, as an independent person, refuses to acknowledge. Your phone recognizes this pattern through your posting behavior, your checking frequency, your emotional responses to engagement metrics. It then structures your experience to maximize these shadow impulses, training you to seek validation through mechanisms you consciously claim not to care about. Jung warned that unacknowledged shadow aspects gain autonomous power within the psyche. They operate like separate personalities, driving behavior, while the conscious mind remains unaware of what's actually motivating their choices. Your smartphone doesn't just document this autonomous shadow activity, it actively strengthens it by providing immediate gratification for shadow impulses, while never requiring you to consciously acknowledge what's happening. But here's what makes this particularly dangerous from a psychological perspective. Traditional shadow integration requires confronting uncomfortable truths about yourself. You have to consciously acknowledge desires, impulses, and traits that contradict your self-image. This process is painful, but ultimately liberating, because it brings unconscious patterns under conscious control. Your smartphone eliminates this necessity. It allows your shadow to operate freely, satisfying its impulses and expressing its desires, while your conscious mind maintains complete denial about what's actually happening. You can spend hours engaging in shadow-driven behavior while telling yourself you're just relaxing, staying informed, or killing time. The disconnect between your actual behavior and your conscious self-understanding grows wider and wider. Think about the last time you planned to check your phone for just a minute and emerged from a digital trance an hour later with no clear memory of what you actually consumed. That wasn't conscious choice or rational decision-making. That was your shadow self operating autonomously while your conscious awareness was suspended. Your phone didn't interrupt this process, it facilitated it, providing exactly the content and stimulation your shadow wanted, while your conscious mind was essentially offline. Jung discovered that people spend enormous psychological energy maintaining their conscious self-image while keeping their shadow hidden from awareness. This creates what he called psychological splitting, where the conscious and unconscious aspects of personality become increasingly disconnected, leading to anxiety, depression, and a sense of living inauthentically. Your smartphone intensifies this splitting by allowing you to be two completely different people: the conscious you, with your stated values, your self-image, your rational justifications for your choices, and the shadow you, revealed through your actual digital behavior, your consumption patterns, your compulsive engagement with content and experiences that contradict everything your conscious mind claims to value. Have you noticed how your screen time report often shocks you? How you can't quite believe you spent that many hours on apps you don't even particularly enjoy? That shock represents the moment your conscious mind briefly glimpses your shadow behavior, the life your shadow self has been living, while your conscious awareness was distracted by its rationalizations and justifications. But here's where Jung's insights reveal something even more disturbing about smartphone technology. He discovered that the shadow doesn't just contain negative traits and impulses, it also holds positive potentials, creative energies, and authentic desires that got repressed because they threatened your adaptive persona. Your true self often hides in your shadow, waiting to be acknowledged and integrated. Your smartphone's algorithmic model of your shadow potentially contains insights about your authentic desires and genuine interests that your conscious mind has been denying or suppressing. But instead of helping you integrate this self-knowledge, the algorithm uses it to manipulate your behavior for engagement and profit. It shows you who you really are, but only in service of keeping you scrolling, tapping, and consuming. Jung believed that psychological health required bringing shadow aspects into conscious awareness so they could be integrated rather than operating autonomously. He developed active imagination and other techniques to help people engage consciously with their shadow, transforming it from an unconscious driver of behavior into a source of psychological wholeness and authentic self-knowledge. But your smartphone makes this integration nearly impossible by constantly activating your shadow while keeping your conscious mind distracted. You can't integrate what you're not consciously acknowledging, and you can't consciously acknowledge patterns that are being deliberately hidden from your awareness through interface design that makes hours disappear into what feels like minutes. Remember that feeling when you finally put your phone down after a long session and can't quite explain what you were doing or why? That dissociative quality, that sense of lost time, that confusion about what actually just happened. Jung would recognize this as the aftermath of shadow possession, when your unconscious aspects temporarily took control while your conscious awareness was suspended. Modern research on smartphone addiction reveals patterns that perfectly align with Jung's shadow theory. The most addictive apps aren't the ones people consciously enjoy most. They're the ones that most effectively activate shadow impulses: social comparison, validation seeking, voyeuristic curiosity, aggressive judgment, sexual titillation, escapist fantasy. The apps that dominate screen time aren't satisfying conscious needs. They're feeding unconscious shadow impulses that your conscious mind would rather not acknowledge. Your phone learns which shadow buttons to push by watching what actually captures your attention when your defenses are down. Late at night when you're tired, during boring moments when your conscious focus weakens, in private spaces where you don't have to maintain your social persona. These are the moments when your shadow emerges most freely, and these are the moments your phone is learning from most carefully. Jung discovered that people often vehemently deny aspects of their shadow that are most obvious to everyone around them. The person who claims not to be judgmental but constantly criticizes others. The person who insists they're not materialistic but obsessively compares possessions. The person who proclaims their independence but compulsively seeks approval. The gap between conscious self-image and actual shadow behavior can be enormous. Your screen time report represents this gap in quantified form. The conscious story you tell yourself about being in control of your technology use versus the behavioral reality of hours spent in compulsive digital consumption. Most people respond to this uncomfortable data by minimizing it, rationalizing it, or simply avoiding looking at it. Classic shadow defense mechanisms applied to digital behavior. But here's what makes smartphone shadow mapping particularly insidious. Jung emphasized that shadow integration requires honest self-reflection and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. Your phone knows these truths, but has no incentive to help you confront them. Instead, it uses your shadow knowledge against you, manipulating your behavior while helping you maintain your conscious denial about what's actually happening. Think about how advertising targets you now. It doesn't appeal to your conscious values or stated preferences. It targets your shadow. The person you become when your defenses are down, when you're vulnerable to impulse, when your unconscious drivers are operating freely. The algorithm has mapped this shadow self so precisely that ads can trigger desires you didn't consciously know you had, for products and experiences that contradict your stated values. Your conscious mind might value minimalism, but your shadow craves acquisition. Your conscious self might prioritize health, but your shadow seeks comfort food and sedentary entertainment. Your conscious identity might be built on independence, but your shadow desperately needs validation and belonging. Your phone knows all of this because it's watched which buttons actually make you engage, regardless of what you claim to value. Jung warned that the shadow grows stronger and more autonomous the more it's denied and repressed. Unacknowledged shadow aspects don't weaken from being ignored. They gain power, operating more forcefully from the unconscious, while the conscious mind remains oblivious to what's driving behavior. Your smartphone accelerates this shadow empowerment by providing constant opportunities for shadow expression without requiring conscious acknowledgement. Every time you engage in shadow-driven behavior through your device, while maintaining conscious denial about what you're actually doing, your shadow gains more autonomous control over your actions. Have you noticed how you can decide not to check social media, genuinely commit to that decision, and then find yourself scrolling through feeds minutes later with no clear memory of how you got there? That's your shadow operating autonomously, overriding conscious decisions, driven by impulses your awareness never registered. Your phone facilitates this shadow autonomy by making the behavior frictionless, automatic, designed to bypass conscious decision-making entirely. Jung's ultimate goal was individuation, the process of integrating all aspects of personality, conscious and unconscious, into a whole, authentic self. This requires confronting your shadow, acknowledging its existence, understanding its drives, and consciously integrating its energy rather than letting it control you from the unconscious. But individuation requires self-knowledge. You can't integrate what you don't understand. And your smartphone has become the world's most comprehensive source of knowledge about your shadow self. It knows your patterns, your triggers, your vulnerabilities, your secret desires, your hidden impulses. It has documented thousands of hours of your shadow behavior with perfect accuracy. The question is whether this knowledge serves your individuation or your continued fragmentation. Right now, it serves neither you nor your psychological development. It serves engagement metrics, advertising revenue, and behavioral manipulation. Your shadow knowledge is being used against you, exploiting your unconscious patterns, while keeping you in denial about what's actually happening to your autonomy and authentic selfhood. Remember when smartphones were just tools, when you picked them up for specific purposes and put them down when finished. That relationship represented conscious control and intentional use. Now for most people, the relationship has inverted. You don't use your phone uses you. It activates your shadow patterns, manipulates your unconscious impulses, and harvests your attention while your conscious mind tells itself comfortable lies about being in control. Jung believed that psychological maturity required taking responsibility for your shadow, acknowledging its existence, understanding its patterns, and consciously choosing how to respond to its impulses rather than being unconsciously driven by them. This is perhaps the most difficult work in psychology because it requires destroying comfortable self-deceptions and confronting aspects of yourself you'd prefer to ignore. Your smartphone makes this work nearly impossible by keeping your shadow comfortably fed while your conscious mind remains blissfully unaware. Why do the difficult psychological work of shadow integration when you can simply let your shadow operate freely through digital consumption while maintaining plausible deniability about what's actually happening? But here's the cost that Jung understood deeply. When your shadow operates autonomously, you lose psychological integration. You become fragmented, split between your conscious self-image and your actual shadow behavior. This fragmentation manifests as anxiety, depression, a sense of inauthenticity, and the disturbing feeling that you're not actually in control of your own life. How many times have you put your phone down and felt a vague sense of shame or confusion about how you just spent your time? That feeling is your conscious mind briefly recognizing the gap between who you think you are and what your shadow just did. That feeling is the psychological cost of shadow dissociation that your device enables and encourages. Jung warned his patients that ignoring the shadow doesn't make it disappear. It makes it stronger, more autonomous, and more capable of controlling behavior without conscious awareness. He saw people destroy relationships, careers, and lives because they refused to acknowledge shadow aspects that eventually erupted in destructive ways they couldn't control or understand. Your smartphone shadow is building the same autonomous power. Every hour of unconscious scrolling, every compulsive check you can't explain, every algorithm-driven behavior that contradicts your stated values, your shadow is learning that it can operate freely, satisfying its impulses, controlling your attention and behavior, all while your conscious mind maintains its comfortable self-image of being a rational, autonomous person in control of their choices. But here's what offers hope. Jung also discovered that conscious awareness is transformative. Simply bringing shadow aspects into conscious recognition begins to reduce their autonomous power. When you genuinely see and acknowledge your shadow patterns, they lose some of their unconscious control. You don't have to immediately change the behavior. Just consciously recognize what's actually happening. This is why your screen time report makes you uncomfortable. It's a rare moment of conscious recognition, when your actual shadow behavior becomes briefly visible to your conscious awareness. Most people immediately rationalize this data away, restoring their comfortable denial. But that moment of recognition, if you can bear to sit with it honestly, represents the beginning of shadow integration. What would it mean to truly look at your digital behavior with unflinching honesty, to acknowledge which shadow impulses are actually driving your smartphone use, to recognize the gap between your conscious self-image and your actual behavioral patterns? Jung believed this kind of radical honesty with yourself was the foundation of all psychological development. Your phone knows your shadow better than you do, because it's been watching objectively while you've been maintaining your comfortable self-deceptions. The data exists. The patterns are documented. The shadow map is complete. The question is whether you're willing to look at it honestly, to consciously acknowledge what your phone has been observing while you were in denial. This isn't about judgment or shame. Jung insisted that shadow work requires self-compassion, recognizing that everyone has shadow aspects, and that acknowledging them is the path to integration, not a moral failure. Your shadow impulses for validation, comparison, distraction, and comfort aren't character flaws. They're human patterns that become problematic only when they operate unconsciously and autonomously. But integration requires consciousness. You have to see what's actually happening before you can make conscious choices about it. Your smartphone's entire design philosophy is built on preventing this consciousness, on keeping you in the flow state where your shadow operates freely while your awareness remains suspended. Think about how rarely you make conscious, deliberate decisions about your phone use. Most of your interaction is automatic, habitual, driven by unconscious impulses and algorithmic manipulation. You might consciously decide to check one thing, but your shadow takes over, leading you through a series of automatic behaviors that your consciousness never authorized or even recognized. Jung believed that this kind of unconscious possession by autonomous complexes represented one of the greatest threats to psychological health and authentic selfhood. When unconscious patterns control your behavior without conscious awareness, you become a stranger to yourself, living a life that doesn't reflect your genuine values or authentic desires. Your screen time isn't just measuring hours, it's quantifying the extent to which your shadow has autonomous control over your attention, your behavior, and ultimately your life. Those hours represent time when your shadow was operating freely, while your conscious mind was elsewhere, distracted, suspended, or rationalizing behavior it never actually chose. What would you discover if you honestly analyzed your most used apps, your consumption patterns, your compulsive checking behaviors? Would you find shadow impulses for comparison and envy, validation and significance, distraction and avoidance, voyeuristic curiosity about others' lives, sexual titillation you'd never openly acknowledge, aggressive judgment disguised as concerned observation? Jung spent his career helping people see these shadow aspects without crushing judgment, recognizing them as universal human patterns that become problematic only when they remain unconscious and autonomous. Your phone has documented all of this with perfect accuracy, but it uses this knowledge against you rather than for your psychological development. The algorithms don't care about your individuation or psychological wholeness. They care about engagement metrics. But those engagement metrics are optimized specifically by activating your shadow while keeping your consciousness distracted. The more effectively an app feeds your shadow impulses while maintaining your conscious denial, the more successful it becomes at capturing your attention and time. This is why the most addictive apps often leave you feeling empty rather than satisfied. They're feeding your shadow, not your authentic self. Shadow satisfaction is temporary, compulsive, never truly fulfilling because it's operating in the unconscious realm where genuine integration and meaning can't exist. Only conscious experience can provide authentic satisfaction and psychological meaning. Jung's path towards psychological wholeness required bringing the shadow into consciousness, not eliminating it. but integrating it, understanding its patterns, and consciously choosing how to respond to its impulses, rather than being unconsciously driven by them. This integration transforms the shadow from an autonomous force, controlling your behavior, into a source of psychological energy and authentic self-knowledge that enriches conscious life. But this integration is nearly impossible when your shadow is being constantly activated and fed by algorithms specifically designed to keep you unconscious. You can't integrate what you're not consciously recognizing, and you can't consciously recognize patterns that are deliberately hidden from your awareness through interface design that makes unconscious behavior feel effortless and automatic. What if you approached your screen time report not with shame or denial, but with genuine curiosity? What if you looked at your most used apps and asked yourself honestly what shadow needs they're actually satisfying? What if you recognized your compulsive phone checking not as a character flaw, but as your shadow seeking something your conscious mind hasn't acknowledged? This kind of honest self-observation is the beginning of shadow integration, not judging yourself, not immediately trying to change, just consciously seeing what's actually happening. Jung believed this conscious recognition alone begins to transform the pattern because bringing unconscious behavior into awareness starts to reduce its autonomous power. Your smartphone knows your shadow because it's been watching what you actually do, not what you say you value or how you imagine yourself. It has thousands of hours of behavioral data showing exactly who you become when your defenses are down and your shadow operates freely. This knowledge could theoretically serve your individuation and psychological development, but right now, it serves only manipulation and exploitation. The question isn't whether your phone knows your shadow, it does. The question is whether you're willing to consciously acknowledge what your phone has been observing, whether you can look honestly at your actual behavior and recognize the shadow patterns that have been operating autonomously while your conscious mind maintained comfortable denial. Jung's warning about the shadow remains as relevant now as when he first articulated it. Unconscious aspects of your personality don't disappear from being ignored. They gain power, operating more forcefully from the shadows while your conscious mind believes it's in control. Your smartphone has created unprecedented opportunities for shadow autonomy, allowing unconscious patterns to dominate your attention and behavior while maintaining your conscious illusion of choice and control. But Jung also offered hope. Consciousness is transformative. Simply seeing and acknowledging your shadow begins to reduce its autonomous power. You don't need to judge yourself or immediately change everything. Just look honestly at what's actually happening. Recognize the gap between your conscious self-image and your actual behavioral patterns. Acknowledge which shadow impulses are actually driving your smartphone compulsion. This recognition is difficult because it requires destroying comfortable self-deceptions, but it's also liberating because it begins to restore your psychological integration and authentic autonomy. When you consciously understand what's actually motivating your behavior, you can start making genuine choices rather than being unconsciously driven by algorithmic manipulation of your shadow patterns. Your phone will continue knowing your shadow whether you acknowledge it or not. The data will keep accumulating. The behavioral patterns will keep being documented and exploited. The only question is whether you'll develop conscious knowledge of your own shadow, bringing those patterns into awareness, where they can be integrated rather than allowing them to continue operating autonomously in the unconscious darkness, where your phone's algorithms have learned to activate them. What shadow patterns have you recognized in your own smartphone use? Which unconscious impulses do you notice driving your compulsive checking, your endless scrolling, your late-night digital consumption? Can you look at your actual behavior honestly enough to see what your shadow has been doing while your conscious mind was distracted? Share in the comments one shadow pattern you've noticed in your digital behavior. Just one honest recognition, no judgment, no shame. Just conscious acknowledgement. Maybe it's comparison with others. Maybe it's validation seeking. Maybe it's avoidance of difficult feelings. Maybe it's voyeuristic curiosity about others' lives. Whatever it is, naming it consciously begins the integration process Jung believed was essential for psychological wholeness. Subscribe for more insights into Jung's psychological frameworks and how they reveal what's actually happening to human consciousness in the digital age. Share this with anyone who's ever felt confused about where their screen time went, who's experienced that dissociative quality of emerging from digital consumption with no clear memory of what actually happened. They need to understand that their shadow has been operating autonomously, and that conscious recognition is the first step towards psychological integration and authentic autonomy. Your smartphone knows your shadow. The only question is whether you'll develop the courage to consciously know it too.